The LA Kings played their first preseason game with one young King standing out. We'll talk about that and more on this edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love for you to leave us a positive comment on Apple Podcasts if you're a fan of the show. And we're on YouTube. Please like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years, 20 plus years at the Fox Sports Radio Network. I'm also co-host of the Puck Podcast, a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the last 18 years and a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Well, the countdown to the NHL season continues. The Kings season opener is October 10th in Buffalo, 16 days away, while the Kings preseason opener was last night in Salt Lake City against the Utah Hockey Club. We're going to do a recap of that game and give you some observations about the first preseason game of the year for the LA Kings. And then we're going to get more into focusing on what we saw from the game. First off, a very familiar voice I saw or heard at the Delta Center in Utah for last night's game. Something you may or may not have noticed or cared about, but David Joseph was the public address announcer for the Utah hockey team. He was the longtime PA announcer for the Kings for many years. Last I heard, he was doing work in Nashville. I didn't see anything on his Twitter account or LinkedIn page about him getting a new job, so I assume he's trying out to be the Utah Hockey Club public address announcer. So best of luck to an old Kings friend in getting that job. As for the preseason game against Utah Grizzlies, we mentioned on Monday's show that the Kings would not have a lot of NHL regulars from last season or expected for this season in the lineup. Forward Trevor Lewis and defenseman Joel Edmondson were really the only true NHL veterans that were in the lineup for the LA Kings. However, Jim Hiller was the head coach for the game, and his top assistants, DJ Smith and Newell Brown, were on the bench as well. One other side note, we mentioned on Monday as well that the Utah Hockey Club, formerly the Arizona Coyotes, was going to go with a pretty heavy veteran NHL squad, and that they did. They included their top forward in Clayton Keller. Their entire top line played in this game, as well as their number one goalie, Connor Ingram. Utah was playing its first ever game on home ice. They had a preseason game the previous night, but it was in Iowa. So they wanted to make a good first impression for the home fans, for the season ticket holders. They wanted to put in an experienced lineup that would hopefully put on a good show and, frankly, get them a win. Normally, we wouldn't go too heavy into a game recap the day after a game, more analysis than recap. We usually do a quick recap on the game, but going to go a little bit more in depth into this game because I don't know how many Kings fans actually saw the game. It was only on the NHL Network, and I'm guessing that the people listening and watching this show, I'm guessing more of them don't have the NHL Network than do. It's just an assumption on my part. But I'm thinking that's where it is. So that's what we're going to do. A little bit more heavy into game recap for this opening segment of Locked On LA Kings for today. So let's start with the opening lineup of the first preseason game for the LA Kings. It was pretty close to the projected lineup we had for Monday's show. The top line was Akil Thomas, Alex Turcotte, and Trevor Lewis. However, Turcotte played center and not Akil Thomas. The second line was what we thought the third line was going to be, and that was Samuel Fagemo with Jeff Malott, not Charles Hudon. And that second line was centered by Francesco Pinelli. Third line, we thought it was going to be the second line, but ended up being the third line. And that was Samuel Hellenius centering Andre Lee and Taylor Ward. Fourth line was Jack Studnicka, Liam Greentree, and Charles Hudon. As for the defensive pairings, just a little bit different. We did have the top pairing of Brant Clark and Joel Edmondson as expected. Second pairing was actually Jacob Moverar and Kyle Burrows. And the third pairing was Andreas Englund and Caleb Jones. The goaltenders, of course, were Eric Portillo and Carter George, and Eric Portillo did, in fact, get the start. As for the opening period of the first preseason game for the Kings, and we're just going to obviously slant this heavily towards what we saw involving the Kings. Kyle Burrows had a nice pass to Charles Udon for a shot on goal. Alex Turcotte, a nice backhand pass to Akil Thomas for a shot on goal. Andre Lee had a shot on goal after a good forecheck created a turnover. Jack Studnicka was later, though, called for goalie interference after a strong move to the net. I thought he was actually pushed into Utah's goaltender by a Utah defenseman. The ref saw it differently. So the Utah Hockey Club got the first power play of the game. As for the Kings' top penalty kill unit, it was Brant Clark, Joel Edmondson, Trevor Lewis, and Akil Thomas. Eric Portillo made a great save to rob a Utah player of a goal, but unfortunately, moments later, again shorthanded against the second penalty kill unit, Utah was able to score. Former King Sean Dursey, a nice pass into the middle of the net, and Utah grabbed a 1-0 lead. Next face-off, and this was in response to the contact with the Utah goaltender. Of course, they didn't want to fight on the start of a power play. But the next face-off after the power play was over, there was a fight between Utah's tough guy Liam O'Brien and the Kings' Jeff Malott. I actually thought Malott won that fight. The very next face-off after that, Jack Studnicka, who was the player who actually collided with the goaltender, fought Travis Barron. Unfortunately for Studnicka, maybe he didn't know that Barron was a lefty or that he could throw left hands very well, because unfortunately Studnicka did end up eating a lot of left hands. But props to Malott and Studnicka for answering the call for the LA Kings. Later in the first period, Kyle Burrows was called for hooking. We had Trevor Lewis, Brant Clark, Joel Edmondson, and this time Alex Turcotte as the Kings' number one penalty killing unit. Utah would score a second goal also on the power play. This was against the second Kings PK unit as well. Eric Portillo made the initial save on the shot, but the rebound hit Alex Kerfoot, who was standing in front of the net, and then he put it in. And Utah had a 2-0 lead after one period. Shots on goal after the first period favored Utah 8-7. Power play chances, the Kings didn't have one. Utah was 2 for 2. The Kings actually won the faceoffs big on this one, 15-5. Hits were 5-4 in favor of the Kings, and block shots favored Utah 4-0. As for the second period, the Kings would turn the puck over while also on a line change to give Utah a golden opportunity to add to their lead. But veteran defenseman Joel Edmondson made a nice defensive play, sliding to block a shot on a 2-on-1. Caleb Jones would throw a shot on net from the point. Connor Ingram would make the initial save for Utah, but Jeff Malott was there to put in the rebound, and the Kings would get their first goal of the preseason and cut the lead to 2-1. Later, Andre Lee absolutely got robbed by Utah goaltender Connor Ingram on a 2-on-1. Good to see Lee active in the play. Alex Turcotte would draw a holding penalty. The Kings would go on the power play with Akil Thomas, Samuel Fogimo, Taylor Ward, and Charles Udon, along with Brant Clark on that first power play unit. Then Udon got tripped. The Kings got a 5-on-3 power play. Samuel Fogimo was set up for 3 shots in consecutive fashion, but couldn't score. Studnicka would step in on a break-in, but couldn't score. And then finally, Alex Turcotte scored on a backhand shot off a feed from Francesco Pinelli. We were tied at 2-2. Later in the second period, Eric Portillo made a nice save and then covered on a redirect shorthanded shot. Brant Clark was then called for a cross-check, so another power play for the Utah Hockey Club. Obviously, Clark wasn't on for the PK in that situation, but Utah would not score, and we'd be tied 2-2 after 2. Shots on goal after 2 periods favored the Kings 20-16. Utah was 2 for 4 on the power play. The Kings were 1 for 2. In faceoffs, the Kings were leading 24-14, and block shots, Utah had the advantage 6-4. So on to the third period, again tied 2-2. Carter George would get the start in net for the Kings, replacing Eric Portillo. And on the other side, former Ontario Reign netminder Matt Villalta would be in net for the Utah hockey team. Not a lot of scoring action or opportunity in the third period. Andre Lee, though, made a nice move at the blue line, skated through 2 Utah players and got a good shot on goal. Villalta, though, made a nice save. Liam Greentree, the Kings' first-round draft pick, would set up Francesco Pinelli for a nice shot on goal, but the save was made. And then Samuel Hellenius had a chance in the final seconds but couldn't convert. And we would be tied at 2-2 after regulation. Game would go to overtime but wouldn't last long. Just 19 seconds into sudden death, Clayton Keller would intercept a Carter George clear up along the boards. Then he would skate in on George and beat him 5-hole. Utah wins the game 3-2. Charles Udon, Alex Turcotte, and Brant Clark were on the ice for the game-winning goal, but obviously not for very long, just 19 seconds into the game. There would be a shootout afterwards, which is what they're doing The last couple seasons in these preseason games, no matter what the score is, they go to a shootout just to let some players get some work in on that. In that one, it was a tough one for Carter George as well, as Matias Michelli and Kevin Stislin would score pretty easily on him. For the Kings, we did get one goal. That was from Taylor Ward, but Trevor Lewis, Samuel Fagemo, and Jack Studnicka were all stopped in the shootout. Your final stats from this first preseason game for the LA Kings. They lose 3-2 in overtime. Shots on goal favored LA 29-23. Power plays were in favor of Utah. They were 2 for 4 with a man advantage. LA was 1 for 2. Faceoffs, 1 favored the Kings 36-20. Block shots favored Utah 14-5. And hits favored Utah 33-18. Keep that in mind as we talk about some of the things we observed from this first preseason game for the LA Kings. So what is the overall takeaway from the first preseason game of the year? Who are some of the players that stood out? Maybe some players that didn't. That's next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Hey, NFL fans, start the season off big with the return of FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. And of course, FanDuel is there for you all the time to bet on Major League Baseball as the regular season is winding down and the postseason is about to get going. College football is in full swing, and the NHL will be here soon, and you can even bet on NHL preseason games like tomorrow's Kings Golden Knights game. Join FanDuel, browse the latest betting odds of your favorite teams and sports on the Sportsbook app, and get in on the action. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. All right, let's get back to this Kings first preseason game of the year. And there were times where it looked like an NHL team was skating against an AHL team. And essentially, that was true, certainly, especially on the power play for Utah. As I mentioned, Utah started about 80% of their NHL roster, while the Kings started about 20% of theirs. Utah played their #1 line, Barrett Hayton, Clayton Keller, Nick Schmaltz. They also had NHL regulars like Alex Turcotte, Matias Michelli, Lawson Krause on their second line. They played 4 of their top 6 defensemen, Mikhail Sergachev, Sean Dursey, Ian Cole, and Yusuf Velimaki, plus their #1 goalie in Connor Ingram. The Kings should actually, I think, get a ton of credit for keeping it close, and LA was far from dominated in this game. But I would say that the better team won, the more talented team on the ice definitely won. Again, this was basically Utah's NHL team against a mostly AHL roster for the LA Kings, but nice to see the Kings score a couple of goals, rallying from down 2-0 against a #1 goaltender in the NHL who was tied for the league lead in shutouts last season. So there were a few things we told you on Monday's show we were going to look for in this first preseason game. And one of them was the Kings' top line and their top defensive pairing, because these are 5 players that we think are going to see significant time for the LA Kings this regular season. And that was the top line of Alex Turcotte, Akil Thomas, and Trevor Lewis. As far as that line went, that was the top line, certainly for the Kings in the game, and maybe the top line in the game period. Certainly you could argue it was amongst the best lines in this game, and that was mostly because of Alex Turcotte. He was active. He scored the Kings goal in that second period to tie things up. He was going head-to-head against NHL veteran centers most of the night, and it was at least an even matchup. Turcotte also went 10 of 13, won 10 of 13 faceoffs, according to Austin Stanovich of the Hockey News, who covers the Kings. Thomas and Lewis were pretty quiet. Turcotte was one of the best, if not the best, Kings players in this game. Would have liked to have seen a bit more from Thomas, but overall, I really liked what I saw from Alex Turcotte. And he had a quote after this game talking about the first preseason game for the Kings, where he said, quote, "It was nice to get like a real game and something different than the scrimmages. Get some touches out there. I think we played really well, and we're going to keep getting better." End quote. That was from Alex Turcotte, who really stood out. I guess you would call him the #1 star if you were going to name one for the LA Kings in their preseason opener. As for the top defensive pairing, what we think is going to be the third pairing for the LA Kings this season, Brant Clark and Joel Edmondson, I thought they were okay. I think Edmondson really went out of his way to get Clark the puck anytime they were certainly in their own zone. There were a couple times where Clark used Edmondson as kind of a safety valve to, get pressure off of him. And then Edmondson, as soon as he saw he was in the clear, would give it right back to Clark. It was like the veteran guy was saying, you're the young guy. It's a preseason game. You need the work. You're the talented guy on this line. You get the puck and do your thing. I thought Clark was pretty good. I liked the way he ran the first power play unit. A lot of patience, good vision from him, even though he didn't get an assist on the Kings power play goal. But I like the way Clark ran the power play. Looked okay defensively, and Edmondson, veteran, third pairing defensive guy, knows when to shoot the puck. When he gets it, he's got a shot. He's throwing it on net. Very reliable, very solid. Nothing spectacular, but certainly did his job. And again, 5-on-5, the Kings were good. And I thought Clark and Edmondson were solid out there. Not spectacular, but solid. Clark was a -1 on the night because he was on the ice in the overtime when the game winner was scored. Did the Kings show more of a physical edge in this game? Because there's been a lot of talk about how physical training camp has been and a lot of talk about how the Kings have added players. They want to be more gritty, more blue collar. I would say, though, other than the two fights, the one by Malott and the other by Studnicka, the Kings were not overly physical in this game, or any more physical that I noticed than they had been over the last couple of seasons. Now, that said, as we have mentioned, this is not the Kings lineup we are going to see on opening night. So it would be more fair to judge how the Kings look as far from a physical standpoint as compared to last few seasons when they have the majority of their NHL roster actually on the ice. So we'll kind of reserve judgment on that. But as far as this first preseason game, I didn't notice the Kings being any more physical than they normally are, so to speak. I did want to see how the 1-2-2 looked as the Kings are moving away from that 1-3-1. I would say it was only really noticeable when Utah would, regroup in their own zone and then try to skate through the neutral zone. But the Kings looked, I thought, pretty solid defensively overall, especially in the neutral zone. They didn't allow a goal 5-on-5 in the game. There weren't any big noticeable breakdowns or breakaways or odd man rushes. There was the one moment where they had a bad line change coupled with a turnover that did lead to a 2-on-1, but Joel Edmondson made a nice sliding defensive play to break that up. So overall, not a noticeable difference really in the large part, but I think as far as the neutral zone, things were pretty well done for the LA Kings defensively. I did mention we were going to keep an eye on the Kings' top 2 draft picks from this past year's draft, which were both in action. That was forward Liam Greentree, the first-round pick, and goalie Carter George, the second-round pick. Greentree had one nice assist to Francesco Pinelli for a good scoring chance after a turnover. Unfortunately, Pinelli was unable to score on that. That was the only play I really noticed Greentree really stepping up and doing something. Certainly didn't notice him doing anything poorly, but that was the only play I remember actually him making a play that almost led to a goal. He finished with no shots on goal, played 11 minutes and 6 seconds. Time on ice, playing on the Kings' fourth line. As for the goaltender, Carter George, he ended up stopping 6 of 7 shots. Unfortunately, the one he allowed was the game winner in overtime. That was against Clayton Keller, one of the top snipers in the NHL. Certainly no shame in allowing that goal, which beat him 5-hole. Carter George just getting that third period of action. Didn't see a lot of shots, but unfortunately did allow the one overtime game winner, and he gets saddled with the loss on the score sheet. Other than Alex Turcotte, were there any other Kings players that kind of stood out? I think I would single out Eric Portillo and Andre Lee for me. I thought Portillo played very well. He stopped 14 of 16 shots and was overall very solid. Yes, he did allow the 2 power play goals, but one wasn't his fault, and the other one was a bit of bad luck on the Kings' part. I thought Andre Lee was physical. I thought he had a couple of very nice scoring chances. He tied for the team lead with 3 shots on goal. And when you're looking at who the Kings may have as an extra forward this year, you're looking at guys like Samuel Fagemo, and you're looking at a guy like Andre Lee potentially. If you're looking head-to-head in this game, as far as those 2 players, I thought Lee stood out overall. Fagemo did have on one power play, they set him up. I think it was Brant Clark set him up like for 3 shots in a row. Boom, boom, boom. Didn't score on any of them. I like him looking for his shot, but other than that little flurry of activity, didn't really notice Samuel Fagemo much at all in that game. All in all, I thought it was a fair showing by this Kings roster. Nothing to get overly excited about or overly concerned about. But what did Jim Miller think, the new head coach of the LA Kings? He said after the game, quote, I really liked the game at 5-on-5. They had their top guys in. Their power play moved it well. So they did some damage there. But 5-on-5, I really liked our game and up and down the lineup for us. Lots of young kids played and did a good job, end quote. That was from Kings head coach Jim Miller commenting on the Kings' first preseason game of the season, a 3-2 overtime loss in Utah against the Utah Hockey Club. Are the Kings looking to trade for another forward? That's next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Hey, no matter how the last game went, anytime you take the field, you've got a shot at greatness. Give your team the best shot at winning by recruiting more MVPs with Indeed, because Indeed is the hiring partner where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. And Indeed is the only job site where you're guaranteed to find quality applications that meet your must-have requirements, or else you don't pay. Indeed partners you with on every step of the way of the hiring process. Find great talent through time-saving tools like Indeed Instant Match assessments and virtual interviews. With Indeed Instant Match, as soon as you sponsor a post, you get a short list of qualified candidates with resumes on Indeed that match your job description, and you can invite them to apply right away. Plus, you only pay for quality applications that meet your must-have requirements. Start hiring right now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/locked-on. Go to Indeed.com/locked-on to claim your $75 credit. Indeed.com/locked-on. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. And PrizePick is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. It is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Think Anze Kopitar will have more or less than 66.5 points this season. Will Adrian Kempe have more or less than 31.5 goals this season? Just go on to PrizePicks app, make your picks right now, and you could be a winner. And you can also win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. PrizePicks is the best way to get in on the action in most states, including California. Download the PrizePicks app today and use the code LOCKEDONNHL and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONNHL on PrizePicks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. I did want to mention one more positive from the Kings' first preseason game. No injuries to report. So far, Arthur Kaliyev is the only injured player for the LA Kings, and still have not heard word on his broken clavicle, his broken collarbone, if he's going to need surgery or not. If he will need surgery, he's going to be out a little bit longer. But regardless, we do know Arthur Kaliyev will miss multiple weeks. But so far, the only player on the Kings injury list. There is one Kings-related note to pass along. The Kings are reportedly looking to bring in a veteran forward to center the fourth line. Dennis Bernstein from the fourth period and the NHL Network floated it out there the other day, and I saw another report that the Kings were targeting Montreal Canadiens forward Jake Evans for a fourth-round draft pick. Evans is 28, played 168 career NHL games, all with Montreal. Last season, played all 82 games. He had 7 goals and 21 assists for 28 points. He's known for his defensive play and his penalty killing ability. So take that report for what it's worth. I would certainly categorize it as a rumor right now, although there are multiple reports the Kings might be looking to bring in a veteran player to upgrade their fourth line center spot. If Alex Turcotte can continue to play the way he played in that first preseason game, the rest of the preseason or the other opportunities he gets in the preseason, then I would hope that those plans would be scrapped in favor of Alex Turcotte, but we'll see. That's out there, and I thought I would pass that along if perhaps you had not heard it. We'll see. As for a training camp report, there isn't one today because the Kings had a day off after 5 straight days of training camp with multiple practices, scrimmages, and, of course, one preseason game. So far, we have heard that this year's training camp has been the most physical and physically demanding in recent years, and I know I wondered how new full-time head coach Jim Miller was going to put his stamp on this team. And so far, it's through making the team work. The players seem to have received this new style and challenge well. and they're putting in the work so far. So positive sign under new head coach Jim Hiller. Yes, the Kings, for the most part, no Jim Hiller, but as we've talked about, this is now his team. This is now his chance to put his stamp on the Kings and to prove that he was the right choice to be the Kings head coach and get the Kings back in the playoffs and out of the first round at least. So again, physical training camp, guys are putting in work, more work than they have over the past few years in training camp. And hopefully that work will turn out to be a good thing for the LA Kings. Well-deserved, again, off day for the Kings. They'll be back at it on Wednesday. Some of the Kings will be staying behind in LA to continue to practice, while another group will be headed to Las Vegas for the team's second preseason game against the Golden Knights. How different or similar will the Kings lineup be as compared to Monday's game in Salt Lake City? We will find out tomorrow when we preview the game here on Locked On LA Kings. If you're planning ahead, the game in Las Vegas will be televised on the NHL Network, and apparently it's also on ESPN Plus as well. If you have either of those options to watch the game, you can check it out 7 p.m. face-off time. If you don't, I'll certainly watch it for you, and we'll have a full report coming up on Wednesday show. For you everydayers, actually it'll be Thursday show because the game's on Wednesday. For you everydayers, those of you that listen and watch Locked On LA Kings every day, coming up on tomorrow, we're going to preview the Kings Golden Knights game, pass along any Kings related news, plus a training camp update. Thursday, we'll recap that Kings Golden Knights game, the second preseason game of the year for LA. And on Friday, it is our weekly Kings fan feedback show. You want to get in on that? The email address is lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE. And as always, you can leave your comments on the YouTube episodes as well in the comment section. And we'd love for you to stay interactive with the show by following us on social media, X, Twitter, and Instagram. We are at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you tomorrow. And as always, go Kings, go.